This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The Archives.
Episode 372. Stand, but don't deliver.
I am ending this long-running saga. I am cancelling the rest of the HS2 project. And in its place, we will reinvest every single penny, £36 billion, in hundreds of new transport projects in the North and the Midlands across the country. This means £36 billion of investment in the projects that will make a real difference across our nation.
This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
Well, Rishi Sunak, seemingly proud to have cancelled the only real nation-building project that Britain has had for generations, to replace it with, well, 10% of the money is going to be spent fixing potholes in roads. Hardly a long-term vision, is it? So what does this tell us about how governments use money, not just in the UK, but in any nation with its own currency? And okay, it did cost more than comparable projects elsewhere. So what does that tell us about Britain's ability to do anything other than run banks and look after sick people? Britain might have been losing its way. Has Rishi Sunak finished off the hope of any other major projects in our lifetime? But there will be less potholes, so that's a win. Not sure it can be classified as visionary, though, are you? So Rishi Sunak has pandered to the anti-HS2 brigade. He's ditched the main reason for the HS2, which was to link London with the north of England, by only taking it as far as Birmingham. So if the people in Manchester want to get to London quickly now, they just have to move to Birmingham. Problem solved. The reason he gave was because, well, times have changed. Hence, a project agreed 15 years ago that was moving very slowly will now not happen at all. The land acquired for the project north of Birmingham is going to be resold. The billions spent on getting this far written off. The north-south divide linked together by railways that were built in the Victorian era. All of this was announced at the Tory party conference last week in of all places, Manchester, which he flew to, by the way, because he doesn't know how bad the trains are. He just caught the plane. So, Steve, I mean, the cost of the project, this is the issue. But is it that big an issue? Let me give you some numbers. The cost of the project back in 2015 was £55.7 billion. That's how much they reckoned. So far, £25 billion has been spent, and there are estimates that it could cost more than £100 billion. Now, look anywhere in the world for large-scale infrastructure projects. They are always double what the original cost was. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has said that this is a sign that the scheme is out of control. This being a government project that for the last 13 years has been a Tory government. So, you know, the vast majority of the life of this project, they were in charge, and they're saying it got out of control. So who can they blame for that? The $25 billion...
Well, the Labour Party, obviously.
Obviously the Labour Party.
What's wrong with you?
So anyway, the $25 billion that's already been spent, let's look at that first of all. What's that done for the UK economy? I mean, it's not wasted money, is it? It hasn't disappeared down a plug hole.
No, it's been spent. I mean, it's government spending. It boosts aggregate demand. So that's the point that the Tories will never get into their heads. But nonetheless, I mean, it is true that it's ludicrously expensive. I'm looking at a tweet by Ole Peters. I love his first name, by the way. Ole is a physicist, and he's established what's called ergodicity economics. And if anybody hasn't checked it out yet, I highly recommend you do, because this is realistic stuff. This is how the real world actually operates. But he actually starts with a question, and this is in the same topic we're talking about right now. Why is HS2 so expensive to build? Out of curiosity, I looked up the construction cost for German high-speed rail network. It's about 20 to 30 million euro per kilometre. HS2 cost about British pounds 200 million per kilometre, 10 times more. Why? Does anybody know? And
lots of tunnels as part of it.
Is it? Okay. Because again, I really don't know. So tunnels obviously are dramatically more expensive.
Yeah. For the southern part, actually, largely. In fact, getting into London, a lot of it was tunnels, because it was tunnelling under London. And then you get out of London, you get into, conservative, leafy green territory. So I've obviously got a tunnel under that, because you don't want
to... Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So it's...
the working class can watch my ass go by, but we can't offend the Tories by actually having to watch the train go past. Yeah.
We can't see all these those northerners coming into our city.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's a chunk of that going on. Yeah. But I mean, but even so, that doesn't fully answer it, does it? Because there's a project in Japan that cost half the amount per mile. And that was largely tunnelled as well. So, and
given Japan's topography of Japan, definitely. Yeah.
So it's hard to know, isn't it? Why do these things cost so much in Britain?
Well, probably because Britain has deindustrialised in the last 40 years. Because services are going to save our economy. We've become a specialist in services. Who needs manufacturing? And then what you've done is you've de-skilled the entire country, but particularly de-skilled the public service, because the easiest way to cut back on spending was to get rid of people who did things. So, you sack your engineers, when they retire, you don't replace them, you cut back on the skills, and ultimately you've got a bunch of people who are pen pushers trying to build a railway.
I mean, it should be noted, 25 billion has already been spent. 25 billion over however many years this is, 7 years so far, is the equivalent of 2% of government spending in 1 year. Over and another interesting fact, over the last 10 years, because of course this is the idea, and we should talk about some of the benefits of HS2, because I'm a big supporter of it, so I'm fuming at this idea, and I appreciate that the costs were very heavy, and people are saying, it's going to make things a little bit faster, who cares about that? But the whole issue is, if you've got an old Victorian era railway line, rail network, which, by the way, over the last 10 years, they've spent £74 billion on just fixing up the existing rail infrastructure. That is the maintenance cost over the last 10 years, 74 billion. So actually, we're spending way more maintaining what we've got now than we've spent building the HS2 so far. So there's the false economy behind all of this. But if you've got an old rail network that needs fixing and closed on Sundays for repair work, so everyone has to get a bus, people don't get on the train because they see it as being unreliable. And obviously the capacity issue of it is not great either, because you've got goods trains, local services, and faster intercity trains all using the same line. If you want to run a train from London to Manchester or London to Liverpool along a line that's also got local services, you can't run it every 10 minutes because you've got to let those goods trains through. You've got to let those local stopping trains go through. So the best you're going to manage is a train every hour or a train every half hour. If you've got one line which is just fast trains, nothing stopping them, you can run them every 5 minutes if you want to. So all that, that hugely increases, and you can run longer trains, do double-decker trains if you wanted to. You can't do anything like that now because the bridges would all need to be upgraded. So you've got this massive increase in capacity. So even though you've got a large upfront cost, if you're getting more people travelling, you've got greater capacity, then you've got an opportunity to bring ticket prices down. So it becomes a more realistic proposition to people who would otherwise take the car, which is what everyone does. I go up to the north to see my mum fairly often. I hire a car and drive up because we haven't got a spare car. We need a car back at the house down here. I hire a car and drive up, and that's cheaper than getting the train. Where's the logic in that? And it's fast. It's faster. So you need that capacity issue to get the prices down. You need it with the reliability to get people back on the trains. It ain't going to happen by just fixing up the Victorian network that we've got.
Yeah, I mean, I find this all the time because I travel frequently by train on the continent, and I also occasionally travel by train in the UK. And it's really like stepping back 2 centuries. And I mean, my favourite journey, I saw a photograph of this and I didn't believe it. But there's still a train line where to open the door, you have to put your hand through the window of the train and grab the handle on the outside. I thought, this belongs in a museum. In fact, the entire British rail system belongs in a museum. And whereas on the continent, you've had it modernised, and now you have, I travel from Amsterdam to France, to Paris in 3 hours. I can do the run to London in 4, so long as it's cheap enough, because it's often far more expensive than flying. And then all the local transport, you're travelling at 120 to 200 kilometres an hour on a range of relatively local networks over there. So hopping on the train and going somewhere, you don't even give it a second thought. That's what you do. Whereas in Britain, oh my God, what's the price going to be? Can I get a cheap fare? Will this thing run? I love some of the reasons I've had trains stopped when I've been in London. I had trains stopped because there's too much sun. I love that. Trains because there are leaves on the rails.
Leaves on the line, very common, yeah.
Oh, my God.
Because an unexpected outbreak of autumn Yeah. So
The one time, yeah. I'll get to my other favorite train anecdote. This is a pity. The one time that I've ever had anything like that happen on the continent was when I was actually going to the funeral of a good friend by train from London to Paris, so from Amsterdam to Paris, and there was a cyclone, and it stopped all rail transport from anywhere along the coast of Western Europe. So I couldn't go. But it took a cyclone to stop the trains, and of course it also stopped the planes. Whereas in Britain, the leaves stopped the trains. I mean, what's going on?
Yeah, I know. It's crazy, isn't it? So something has to change. And yet the argument from Rishi Sunak is that the behaviours have changed. You know, he says we're travelling less post-pandemic, which is true, but it is heading back up. So 1.7 billion journeys made the year before the pandemic, 1 billion in the year 21 to 22, 1.4 billion in the year 22 to 23. So the trend is back up. But, you know, we are making a long-term decision based on a short-term change in behaviour. But in any case, I mean, people didn't need the telephone, did they? We didn't need telephones because people weren't talking to people in other cities. You know, the telephone created the demand for us to talk to other people who weren't in the same room as us. So there is an element of build it and there will come. But governments obviously can't fathom that thinking because that's very difficult to do in a cost-benefit analysis.
And that's the trouble. It's all come down to cost-benefit analysis and the not looking at the side effects of what you do. So, of course, as you say yourself, if you don't build decent rail, then you get more people on the roads. And then again, given what climate change and actually running out of oil is going to do to not to running out of oil, but run out of oil, that's actually worth getting out of the ground, given the cost of the energy cost going in to get the stuff out again. As that gets more extreme, then ultimately there's going to be no point and sometimes no possibility of travelling by car. So if you don't have the rail, that's the end of communication.
It's interesting how Rishi Sunak is using falling passenger numbers as a reason to ditch the project, but seems to feel the need to introduce legislation to stop smoking when smoking numbers have seen a massive decline over the last decade and continue to fall. But he's going to pass a law to make it that you can't smoke. So even though obesity is on the way up, smoking is on the way down, but he chooses smoking, maybe because the people he wants to attract the votes don't smoke but are overweight, perhaps, who knows, and don't travel by train. They want their cars because it is all about helping motorists. So, I mean, all of this points to the fact that long-term projects, the big problem with them is, and I don't know how you get over this problem, and it must be an issue in other parts of the world, long-term projects get sidetracked or, in this case, closed because of politics.
That's also the attitude, to anti-manufacturing attitude, and the attitude the government shouldn't spend money. And I think both of those are the fundamental flaws in this whole reasoning process. I have yet to travel, unfortunately, on a Chinese high-speed rail, but I want to do that if ever I get to China again. Unbelievable extent to which the Chinese have done the engineering to cover virtually the entire country in high-speed rail. And that has been part of. And I don't know whether it actually extends so far as travelling goods. I mean, I'd really like to find that out, whether they send goods that way as well. But the entire country is connected, and we're talking a continental side country. I think China is certainly bigger than Australia. And yet it's got an enormous rail network. And part of it comes down to the people who get into government. And as much as people say, China's a dictatorship and we're a democracy, I mean, I think we should call it a jokeocracy. It's closer to it. You get clowns running it. I want to call it a jokeocracy. And Rishi Sunak, what's a good nickname for Ricky, do you think?
Well, I think just change the Rishi to Richie, because I mean he is
Rishi Sunak.
I mean that's where it's bizarre that none of this affects him because he would never obviously travel by train. I mean, he does live in the north of England some of the time, but I'm fairly sure there's a helipad up there. I don't think he's getting the train on the East Coast Main Line. And standing in the join between the carriages for a few hours. I'm sure he doesn't do that.
And it reminds me of a wonderful Punch cartoon. I was a great fan and subscriber to Punch for many years. And there was a Punch cartoon around the time when it was decided by the High Court, or what do you call it? The High Court in the UK? Is it called the High Court?
Well, there is the High Court. This is the Supreme Court as well. It's probably the High Court you're thinking of.
Yeah. Okay. The High Court decided that there should be full cost recovery for fares, and it had three lords, three of the judges sitting in the back of a Rolls Royce saying, "It's agreed again. It's agreed then. They should pay more for their trains.
Yeah, well, that's where we are. So look, I've got some numbers. So yes, I found the numbers on that Japan example. So the 134 miles between London and Birmingham is now expected to cost £53 billion. So that is just shy of £400 million per mile. So the Shinkansen line in Japan cost 50 million per mile, actually. So a lot less. But it did include a lot of tunnels. So there is we are in a different proportion. So we're not costing twice as much. We are 8 times as much. That is, by the way, opened in 2016. That took 4 decades. And the issue is that it's, is it profitable is the question mark. But I mean, my question is that, does it need to be profitable? Number one. And secondly, if it costs that much more in the UK, part of the reason, well, who knows? Because Japan obviously has they tunneled through a great deal and they've got a lot of beautiful countryside that they would want to preserve as well. Plus that line, I think, is going underwater a great deal. But part of the problem with the UK versus China, for example, is that we wouldn't build a railway here that would just demolish areas of, natural interest. We wouldn't destroy the countryside if we could possibly avoid it, because there's some things that Brits hold dear. You're not going to demolish a village that's hundreds or thousands of years old to build a railway line. You'll tunnel under it, or you'll take a more expensive route. So that makes it more expensive here.
But I think the Japanese are going to be the same. I mean, the Japanese are far better than the British, frankly, at preserving their ancient building. Yeah, so I don't think you can make that comparison. It comes down to having an engineering culture versus having a bean counter culture. And I don't even mean bean counters because, of course, economists can't count. They can make up numbers, but they can't count in the first place. So it's the attitude the government shouldn't spend, and that you should do cost-benefit analysis for everything. Whereas the Japanese attitude is we want to connect our country together, and the best way to do that is rail. So they do it. And of course, China, an order of magnitude more on that front. It is just the anti-manufacturing attitude.
And so is it the right decision then to say it's just costing too much? Or does it matter? At what point does it actually become too expensive? If we say, well, this is in effect money that the government is spending, it's money that is being pumped into the economy, it has a stimulus impact in that it's employing people, even before you see the benefits of when it's delivered. In the meantime, there's people employed, there's all the multiplier effect of all those people employed. At what point does it become too expensive? How do we measure it? Do we say, well, okay, we're employing people and we're paying people, but maybe those people could have been employed doing something else, which might be more beneficial to the economy. How do we gauge it?
You don't even go there, Malta, because the whole problem is that they are seeing this as a cost when it is in fact a means by which the government can create money. And I saw there's some bloody neoclassical economist in America raving about how R greater than G numbers mean the government's going to run up in unpayable debt. When you do the accounting, and this is what my Minsky software is always designed to do, there's absolutely nothing apart from a couple of laws, just laws passed by the House of Lords and other loonies in Parliament. Laws meaning that the government can't sell its bonds directly to the central bank. Now, if you got rid of those laws, and there's absolutely no practical obstacle to the government creating the money by running a deficit to finance something like the HS2, and then the Bank of England buying all the bonds. And so the government would owe debt to the government, which means there's no government, no interest payments whatsoever. It's nothing apart from legal laws which have been drafted by people who've listened to neoclassical economists who don't know the first bloody thing about accounting or virtually anything else. And this is the reason we get stupid decisions like this. I mean, the moonshot. Go back to the classic. What was the cost benefit of going to the moon? And the cost benefit was probably very well put by JFK when he said that we do this not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And it's taken, and again, that was shut down by people doing bean counting about the cost, and it's too expensive. So we lost 40 years before we got to the private sector being able to develop the technology that now means private organizations are better at doing space shots than the government today, but they wouldn't have got better if the government hadn't done the loss leading initially. And this attitude that you shouldn't do it, so it's going to cost too much, only applies to private sector. When it comes to the government, it is a question: is this a useful infrastructure to add to our civilization? Is it a useful way to pump increase aggregate demand at a time when it's deficient? And the answer to both those questions for something like HS2 is probably yes.
Right, but to what extent, though? Does there become a limit? Because, I mean, obviously, if it became known that, hey, look, the government can spend, it can its expenditure can just sit on the balance sheet at the central bank forever, and it's not really costing anyone anything. In effect, it is created money created by the government, which is added to aggregate demand, as you say, in the economy. At what point does that become a problem? Because if everyone knew that, then obviously people supplying to this project would go, oh, we're going to double our prices now. It's just created money. What do you care? I mean, where do the controls be?
And that's part of the problem. That again, a lot of the stuff has been outsourced to the private sector because you've lost the capability within government of managing and doing projects of that nature. I don't know the Chinese situation, but I'd be highly surprised if it was entirely privately outsourced. There'd be large amounts of government management and government staff and government engineering going into it as well. And it really comes down to the role of projects like this is more to raise the technological level of the country than to the government is the classic loss leader. The government can afford to do these things. Now, of course, as you say, you do have. I mean, the space race is a classic instance of that because what began as a venture to beat the Russians and in that case, the attitude was to do it as well as possible. And now what happens is one reason that NASA is so uncompetitive against the private sector today is that a huge number of its manufacturing sites are being captured by local political interests, and you've got to spend money there to pump up this particular Republican or that particular Democrat's re-election chances if that's the party that dominates the local state legislature. So you can get all sorts of appalling traps like that, I agree. But fundamentally, it comes down to having a nation-building attitude, which is what you'll find certainly in China and to some extent still in Japan, versus a bean counter attitude.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, thank God Britain wasn't in the space race and Rishi Sunak wasn't the Prime Minister, because everyone will be looking at the UK's attempt to reach the moon, and Rishi Sunak will be there saying, yeah, we looked at that. I know we're about to launch. It's got expensive, and I've channeled all that money instead into the Skipton bypass on the A19 or whatever it is. Look, when we come back, I want to look more at cost-benefit analyses, something that and I'm going to draw on an experience I've got, which I just found unbelievable, which is the business case behind the National Broadband Network in Australia, and how that turned out as an example of, it's not just Britain that can stuff up major engineering projects. So we'll look at that when we come back on the Debunking Economics podcast.
This is the Debunking Economics podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
So, Steve, I looked it up during that break. The high-speed rolling stock and all the engines for the high-speed trains and the networks in China largely come from a massive company called CRRC, which is a state-owned engineering company. The lines are being built, or at least designed and coordinated, by the state-owned China Railway Corporation, Construction Corporation, I should say. There's the answer to what we were discussing earlier. They don't get ripped off because they keep it in-house, and presumably they employ people who are engineers, who know what they're doing. I wonder how many engineers there are directly employed by the UK government. So anyway, getting back to the cost-benefit analysis, the problem is how you measure the benefits against the costs of large infrastructure projects. So we've been saying, the cost is important, but perhaps less important when you're talking about government money, because it is all money aggregate that just adds to the amount of money that's in circulation in the economy. Basically, it's sort of pump priming the economy in a good old Keynesian fashion, I guess. But it's when you look at the benefits, and I remember the business case for the National Broadband Network. And the guy that was recruited by the Conservative government, the Liberal government in Australia at the time, under Malcolm Turnbull was the communications minister, was based on people's willingness to pay for faster broadband. That was the argument. So what is missed out or was missed out, which is often underestimated, is the societal benefit of all of these things, plus an understanding of how behaviour is going to change. So, exactly the same. There's Rishi Sunak saying, well, fewer people are travelling by train. Well, maybe more people would travel by train if they were faster and they worked and there's more of them. It was the same with the NBN. People had fairly slow broadband. If they were told they could have gigabit speeds, how much would they be willing to pay for that? And, the research showed that people would go, well, what I've got is good enough, really. I wouldn't be prepared to pay any more for gigabit speeds because I'm okay with what I've got. But of course, it's how that changes behavior once you've got it. It's asking people, and this is the problem with cost-benefit analysis, isn't it? It's asking people what they want when they often don't know what they can have.
Henry Ford put that beautifully when he said, if I ask my customers what they want, they'd want a faster horse.
Yeah.
And so it is a lack of vision coming out of this, an attitude from economic theory fundamentally, where economists don't understand technology. Technology to them is a magic wand. And this is one of the problems that they have in understanding everything. But certainly when it comes to a project like this, they can't contemplate what they call externalities, but positive feedbacks that come out of something of that nature. And my favorite example there is actually South Korea, and wait for it, the president of the South Korean Communist Party, who he liked my work on Marx, which is fun because I actually proved Marx, the Labour theory of value, contradicts his philosophy. But anyway, he came out to stay with me at Western Sydney. Very Stalinist personality too. It wasn't a fun meeting. But anyway, he came out and he complained about the cost of the. This is again that the South Korean housing was much cheaper than Australian at the time. So he asked me to get a cheaper flat than we were originally located for him. And he turned up and complained about the cheapness of the flat. But then he got out his computer and pulled out his Ethernet cable and went walking around the walls trying to find the plug for the Ethernet cable. And this is about 1998 or thereabouts. And I had to tell him, I'm sorry, you're looking for a T100 connection on Ethernet. No house in Australia has that. And he went, what? I said, we don't have it. We use, at that stage, it was telephone broadband, wasn't it? What do you call that old system? I've forgotten it now. You should know.
What the old dial-up internet?
Not dial-up, not what's called... not dial-up, one level above dial-up. But anyway, it was 12,000 baud was about the maximum you got. Anyway, he said...
The plain old telephone system, the POT system. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. No, it wasn't POTS. It was the...
ADSL, perhaps?
Anyway, it was ancient. Okay. Okay. And he finally said, look, in South Korea, every home has an Ethernet connection. And I said, oh, how did that? And he said, well, the South Korean government told the telecommunications companies that they had to get together and make sure every house in the country had a T100 Ethernet cable connection. It didn't care how they did it. They had to do it if they wanted to continue operating as telecommunications companies in South Korea. Now, I wonder where Samsung came from.
Yeah. So
whereas the idiot, I can't call him idiot because that's insulting some idiots that I know. Tony Abbott, when he was Prime Minister or whatever he was at the time, said, nobody needs high speed, so we're going to do it cheaper, and we're going to have, rather than having optical fibre to the home, we're going to have optical fibre to the node and then use the copper network, and it'll be cheaper. And you know better than I what a disaster that was.
Well, the irony is out of all of that was because the government didn't absorb, and I want to talk about this, the longer term benefits and how you account for that, because the cost had to be absorbed by the entire industry and by their customers. What you had was a whole load of cross subsidization. So people living in the cities, living in Sydney, for example, had to cross subsidize, still do, the cost of broadband access, which is provided to people in remote areas of Australia. And it was open when they eventually opened it up to competition. They allowed competition in the cities, but they made everyone pay a tax to cover the cost of providing infrastructure to those people in the more remote parts. So what's actually happened is Australia's got very expensive broadband now, and not particularly fast either, because they compromised on the vision of providing fibre to every home, and the government built what most countries already had at that stage, which was fibre to the node. And the reason, which was basically to fibre to a cabinet in your street and then using the existing copper. That's what a lot of people still have in Australia. But it's been government subsidised because they were afraid to take on the incumbent that they'd created through the privatisation of Telstra. So actually, if Telstra had stayed in government hands, okay, you would have had a monopolistic government-owned entity, but they could have built out that broadband that much faster and that much cheaper.
And that much cheaper. And yeah, I mean, the whole thing is, I mean, I'm quite happy. And this is one of the points which I think you can get from Janos Kornai's attitudes to the private sector versus public. How do you draw a dividing line? And in the case of large infrastructure like optical fibre, you don't want 15 optical fibre providers most of the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes it makes sense. Optical fibre in the financial sector, they want higher speeds again. But generally speaking, you have a public provision, and it could be private organisations that do it, but with public payment. And then you have private groups all competing to provide down the cable.
But you know what? If you were to say to the private sector in Australia, look, if they'd known the future, if you'd said, well, okay, the government is going to keep the infrastructure, the network infrastructure, the last mile infrastructure, just that connection to people's homes. We're going to do that because no one's going to make a lot of money out of that, but that's where the benefits will accrue from us laying out fibre optic as quickly as we can to as many people as possible. If the government says we're going to do that, the rest of the industry would hang on to that and say, well, that's fantastic. We'll build core networks that can deliver faster speeds on top of that. We'll build the server farms that are going to be needed for this increased usage of the opportunities that emerge from people having all of that. We'll build the software. That's where the real margin is. The margin is not in providing that last mile infrastructure. So get the government to do it as a public good. I think most people in the private sector would say that is a fantastic outcome because we're actually making money where the money is made. You guys do the stuff that's hard to make a profit out of.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a reasonable dividing line between public and private expenditure. But and what you get is, and that's one reason why South Korea has become a major developer of telecommunications technology, right down to the software and the music. And it was the government said, loss leading. I don't know who paid for it. It would have probably been the South Korean government, but they would have. They just basically told the private organisations every house has to have a T100 connection, and that was far faster than anything which existed in most Western nations at the time. And lo and behold, one of the feedback effects of that was South Korea now tends to dominate telecommunications. China's now doing the same thing. So it's an attitude which is pro-investment and pro-manufacturing, which is still something you'll find commonly in Asia. And Europe and America and Australia are dominated by this neoclassical economics cost-benefit analysis, where they only ask people, what are you willing to pay for it, not looking at the spillover effects of some technology like that coming along.
So the other danger as well is that if you look at the cost and the revenue received, how long do you spread that cost over to see your return? So, I mean, the real formula, if a new railway is going to last 100 years or 200 years, really what you should be doing is saying, well, okay, once we've built it, what is the maintenance cost over that 100 or 200 years? And surely spread that cost over that time. But no government ever is going to obviously sit on a business case that says, well, this has got a 200-year payback. But surely that is the way of looking at it because it provides 200 years of benefit. If you were in doubt about building the railways, and we should talk about that because Britain was, first to roll out railways, actually not by the public sector, but by the private sector. And that was done, and that did provide an immediate payback. But if it didn't, you could just say, well, okay, if it costs a lot and we are looking for the payback for whatever reason, if it's government money, why should we be so concerned? But if we're looking for the payback on this, let's spread it over the whole lifetime of the asset that we're building, and it would pay for itself many times over. I don't know what the payback period for HS2 would be, but I'd suggest it's going to be less than a decade, certainly less than 2 decades.
Yeah. And again, it's applying private sector thinking for a publicly funded organisation, and not looking at how technological development and change occurs over time. One of my main points that I would think about HS2 and the entire existence of high-speed rail throughout the UK is that at some point we are going to see it becoming impossible to use petroleum to finance to power trips anymore. because one of the long-term trends, well, first of all, we're going to be told no more carbon dioxide at some point. If anybody doesn't believe that, wait 5 years and you'll find out the hard way as to why that's necessary. But also, we've been forever, using for more and more remote sources of oil to power our civilization. And at some point, the amount of energy you've got to put in to get that oil out gets to the point where oil itself is no longer a source of energy, it's a sink. You're actually putting more energy in to get the damn stuff out of the ground and package it, process it, distribute it, and so on. And so at that point, it's goodbye to automotive transport. Whereas if you have, this is the great advantage of rail, it's electric. And therefore, if you have your power sources, whether they're nuclear or they're renewable, whatever else, it isn't affected by the potential ending of the oil age.
So is anyone ever going to invest in the UK? So if the government's not, because the way around this, if you think, it's too expensive for government investment, that's where you start looking at public-private partnerships. So a question on that is that ever a good idea? And secondly, if it was, who's going to invest in Britain? Because I would have thought that this would be a risk now. Because you look at all of this, the new hospitals programme that was promoted by Boris Johnson, that's gone nowhere. The Houses of Parliament is a phenomenal cost, which makes HS2 look like just a drop in the ocean, and that's going to take possibly 90 years to finish.
Give me a bit of background there. Because I used to live pretty much opposite the House of Parliament. So they're spending more on that than they spend on the HS2.
Well, maybe not quite, slight exaggeration, but look, it is one of those projects that's just another example of Britain's inability to deliver. So I think they started, it's only going to cost £70 million or something like that. And then that rose to about £3.5 billion, pretty quick, sharp, and MPs would have to move out for 6 years. And if they didn't want to do that, and it was just a rolling programme, then it would cost £6 billion. Now, somehow, that's risen to, about £22 billion, and it's going to take 76 years because they're just going to sort of do it as a series of interim fix-me-upper type jobs. The Houses of Parliament is just a fixer-upper now. So it's probably going to cost a lot more than the HS2 by the time they've finished it. So, it's just another example of the inability for the UK to deliver on large-scale engineering projects. Can't even fix up the Houses of Parliament.
That's actually making me laugh quite a bit for other reasons, because
or cry.
Well, cry as well, but hey, I don't live in the UK anymore, so it's always I'm observing it from the outside. The House of Parliament burnt down on October 16, 1834. So as we're recording this video, we're actually leading up to almost the 190th anniversary of it burning down. And the reason it burnt down, and do you know the reason it burnt down?
Well, it wasn't Guy Fawkes in 1605 or whenever it was, because he didn't succeed.
No, it was, because the Parliament used to collect taxes using tally sticks. And tally sticks were pieces of wood which were cleaved down the middle. One person would get the stock, the other would get all the terms we use, like the stub and stuff like that, come out of this.
So it became a fire hazard.
It became a fire hazard. Now, what happened when they went across to paper money? They would cost all the money. And taxes were paid with pieces of wood. Okay, that was the way you did it. And that if that was what we had a record of today, people would realise that money is not gold and stuff like that. It's a promise to pay. And the promise to pay was recorded on pieces of wood called tally sticks. You can find one or two surviving examples if you go to the Bank of England. But anyway, when they went across to paper money to do it instead, all these pieces of wood had accumulated, and they decided to get rid of them, to burn them. And they burnt them in the House of Parliament. The fire got out of control and burnt the place down.
Yeah, well, not the whole building, but looking at this now, the Great Fire of 1834. It's an incredible story. I didn't realise that. There we are. You're teaching me a bit of English history there.
Cost-benefit analysis wins again.
So, but if you look at all the big projects that, have been looked at, so the hospital programme, the Houses of Parliament, Hinkley Point nuclear reactor, God knows what's happening with that. That was budgeted to be about £33 billion. Originally, it was, I think, 26 billion, so it's not moved too far, but it's not moved too far in terms of progress either. And by the way, we're going to have Chinese money put into that, and we decided against. That was the bizarre thing as well. Let's get foreign money in to build stuff that could just be funded by our own government, which again is this strange.
Oh, no, hang on. There are some things you got to buy in Britain using the renminbi. Okay, lots of shops will only accept the renminbi.
Well, this is the crazy stuff, isn't it? Why
God.
for infrastructure projects would you attract foreign investment? What is the benefit of that?
Well, partly that probably reflects that Britain can't build anything anymore, and maybe they're bringing in the engineers. Or, this is just.
And the engineers do want to be paid in the renminbi. So we need foreign money to be able to pay out foreign money to import the workers to get the work done. Is that what you're saying?
And the technology and buy the goods and buy the machinery that's necessary to make it as well. That's a possibility, but it's still a joke.
So anyway, this all gets down to education, doesn't it, at the end of the day? I mean, Britain, if Britain is incapable of building large-scale infrastructure projects, which seems like it is, then you are just in a state of terminal decline until you can fix that issue. So this is a little bit more than a cost-benefit analysis for a rail project. There's something fundamental about Britain that this is telling us.
I think it is. And this is the deindustrialisation of the place finally coming home to roost. And all you can do is sell bits of, sell debt to each other, which people are no longer buying.
Yeah. Well, Rishi, the change merchant, who says, well, we're going to use this money to build various bypasses on roads in the north and to fix up some of the northern rail connections, is not the visionary that we need, is he? I'm not quite sure who is.
No.
But he needs to emerge from somewhere. It's not Nigel Farage either, who could be the next Prime Minister. There's a scary thought. Anyway, we'll leave it there for now. And look, next week, I thought we might talk about why are some countries poor. I wasn't thinking about Britain, but maybe that's part of it. And why are some countries poor, and why will Britain be joining them?
It's heading that way.
We'll look at that next week on the Debunking Economics podcast. Good to talk, Steve.
Ditto, mate. Bye.
The Debunking Economics podcast.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, then please share it with your friends, like it on YouTube, and subscribe to this channel.